Hello folks, happy Thursday. As you can see, a little change in environment here, but hopefully you can see okay. I know the lighting's a bit weird. Yeah, wanted to kind of record something at home while I'm getting everything together for the week. So, I wanted to continue on with our discussion that we started on Tuesday. And as you can see, there was only one video on Tuesday to kind of give us all a little bit of a breather, but also you noticed the assignment, I hope, and took some extra time in completing that. But I wanted to continue on this discussion about beer, right? And I'm not going to claim to be any sort of expert as it relates to beer, the brewing process. I actually, in years past, what I have done is I've had a local friend and colleague of sorts come in and give a guest lecture. He's a cicerone, which is essentially the equivalent of a sommelier, but for beer, so a beer expert. And he's come in and given a guest lecture because he is much more qualified than I as it relates to beer. And unfortunately, this year, not going to happen. So, so I know that I don't have all the expertise as it relates to conversations on beer. And usually when Ryan comes in and talks with us, and that's his name, Ryan, he's able to answer many other questions or many more questions and engage in a discussion that is really, really fruitful, really, really worthwhile. So what I would like to do today, short of having that space, short of trying to find and be an expert, I want to just work through this article on ephemera. It's on page 19 of Handling the Hard Stuff. And it's a little bit of a sideways kind of piece to engage with beer, but it actually might be kind of helpful. And as you know, as you saw, your paper for Tuesday was on your own history with alcohol. And then today, your own history with alcohol. And sorry everybody, got distracted. So I'm in my apartment and somebody was just kind of making some noise coming down the hall, so I got distracted. I apologize. So aside from what we had started on Tuesday, I wanted to continue with thinking about ephemera as it relates to what we might be able to unpack more and more with beer, right? And so ephemera, just as a definition, is things that exist or are used for only a short time. Phrased differently, items of collectible memorabilia, typically written or printed ones, that were originally expected to have only short-term usefulness or popularity. And what I actually think is kind of helpful about this little chapter and about thinking about beer, maybe as it relates to ephemera, connects with your writing piece from Tuesday on your own history with alcohol. That my guess is that many of you, when you think of beer, right, you think of a label, right? You either think of a label, or maybe you think of a neon sign, or maybe you think of a poster. Like, you probably think of something other than the actual substance of beer, which is, again, really interesting to think about. Okay? Also considering like the context in which beer is served or beer exists is rather fascinating. And so to that end, I think that this article is actually pretty helpful as it relates to kind of thinking about beer. And so what it does, and written by William Weaver, don't know who that is, explore the complex social implications of drinking through ephemera. And the article does discuss wine ephemera and like kind of coasters, buttons, flyers, more so as it relates to wine. But on page 26, we do start talking about beer ephemera. Though reams of material are available to prompt interesting discussions on wine and its social implications, beer ephemera quickly overtake wine-related collectibles like a moving avalanche of hops. Okay? And again, to this end, I'd be curious to know, like, when I say, what comes to mind when we think about beer? Do we think about lagers? Do we think about pilsners? What's the difference between a lager and a pilsner? What do you think about an IPA? What about a pale ale? What about a stout and a porter, right? Like all these different styles that we might think of beer as it relates to like those styles. But we also, again, might think very clearly of labels. We might think very readily of labels and of kind of like images associated with beer rather than just its own substance. And so with that, I'm actually going to pause, and then we'll pick back up here on page 26 in handling the hard stuff, thinking about beer ephemera.